I'm so excited to be interviewing Dr. Eric Payne. We'll get into all his credentials, but he's a pediatric neurologist, also has a master's degree in public health. I mean, he's a guy we should listen to when it comes to exploring the very big complexity of things like what's happened in the last 4 years. The reason I felt that this conversation is really important is because I feel like we've exited a bit of the more emotional reactivity and the activation that is within the experience of discussing anything when we're looking at the last 4 years. I think what lives in the last 4 years is a lot of trauma, a lot of heightened emotion, a lot of fear. And I think people are, from a nervous system perspective, quite exhausted of reading about death counts and wars and all this kind of stuff. And really, that stuff has all been amped up. Social media has amplified that, the inability to talk about things if you don't have one position or another. So, all of these things are going on in our human experience, and they're really invading. And I say that because it feels like a virus is invading our relationships, is invading our connections. This conversation is about the exploration of the science, of about the discussion, the dialogue. And I feel like we've, of course, been quite resistant to this conversation. I think a lot of people still are. And you might be like, oh, damn, like this. The reason this is important is because if we can actually sit with the totality of the information, a few things happen. One, we start to actually see everything that's occurred beyond what the mainstream media has told us. We see beyond like what the quote unquote experts that we were provided or promoted to witness and see on television, how there was just one story, one narrative. And when I worked in pharma, when we did a symposium at a conference, and there was a product we were promoting, we would often have opposing views having conversations because when you have dissenting views, you choose the right thing. You choose the thing that causes the least amount of harm and the most amount of benefit. And the reason these conversations are actually really important is because we can look in hindsight and see that a lot of the interventions that were done, they produce little to no benefit compared to the immense amount of harms, closing schools, masking children, lockdowns, right? Mandates. All of these things created a lot of division that, in Canada at least, there's been no inquiry into our response. Of course, because why would they want to investigate themselves? And see, there was great violations in ethics. The reason I think this conversation is important too is because it's important to know that we can all be bamboozled. We can all be manipulated when we're really afraid. And as societies, we need to study history, right? So that we don't repeat it. Dr. Eric Payne's experience being an expert, being that he operates with such high integrity. You're going to see in this interview the level of emotion that comes forward for him with the concern and the frustration and the sadness as to what we have allowed to happen. And the common conversation is that we were doing the best with what we knew. That's a common conversation. Like we were operating in real time, going at the speed of science. Were we? That seems like a pretty convenient excuse for canceling dissenting opinions who were highly credentialed, highly like big experts in these spaces, all of a sudden villainized. This is something that I think is imperative to explore because this impacts all our relationships. Because we were taught to look at the person who is critical of what's going on and call them a conspiracy theorist and call them a tinfoil hat wearer. So I think as humans, we're really waking up to how the media shapes our perspectives, how we're not told the totality of the truth, how mainstream media, if you look at the data, the amount of people who actually trust mainstream media is going down and down and down. And that's for good reason, because it's bias. It's extremely biased. So because now we have more nervous system capacity to hear these things and to maybe hold the dissonance that we might have become someone we didn't like, which I could say that with full responsibility for myself, due to anger, due to fear, due to all the things. And so we can do better, right? When we know better, we can do better, as Maya Angelou said. And so this is about knowing more so we can know better. So it'd be really helpful if you hit the like button on the video to get it on more feeds, hit that subscribe button, and make sure you pump the notification button so that you get told when new videos are coming up. Let's go. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mark Groves Podcast. Today we are in a hotel setup because I had the awesome opportunity to be able to interview someone I've wanted to have on the podcast for a very long time. Welcome, Dr. Eric Payne.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here. I've been, we've been, I think, trying to get this thing for a while, so it's good to be here.
Yeah, and for the people listening or watching, can you maybe share, just because you have a lot of credentials and I don't want to get them all wrong, so could you share some of the training that you had and maybe why you can be very much considered an expert in the conversation we're about to have?
Yeah, I'm born and raised in Canada, grew up in Ottawa, did undergrad in phys ed and life science at Queen's, and then I did a Master's of Science in cell biology and metabolism, McMaster, and then transferred to the University of Calgary for medical school. So that was 2003 to 6. Got to do that with my brother at the time, which was awesome. And then stayed in Calgary to do a 5-year pediatric neurology residency at the Children's Hospital. And then left to go to the Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto, which is, probably it's definitely the premier pediatric hospital in the country. And I stayed there for 3 years doing a neurocritical care and epilepsy fellowship. And then I spent my summer months at Harvard in Boston doing a master's of public health. And was supposed to come back to Calgary at that time, but there was actually a hiring freeze back in Alberta. And so I got recruited to Mayo Clinic. I spent 6 years at the Mayo Clinic doing epilepsy and child neurology, and following research, especially with respect to neuroinflammation. Yeah. And then you got recruited back heavily to Calgary, which, for my wife, who's from Brandon, Manitoba, and when we had small kids at that point, they were 3, 5, 7 when we moved. We wanted to be back in Canada. It was the right fit, but the bigger deal was that they were going to give me almost 50% protected for research, and a good stipend to start a neuroinflammatory clinic. And I was going to be able to sort of help push the neurocritical care program that they were really at the forefront of. And so that was February 2020, a month before.
That's when you moved.
That's when we moved, a month before the pandemic.
So life's rolling.
That's right. Yeah. So I remember sitting in that office thinking, wow, in retrospect, medicine was something I wanted to do since I was like 5 or 6. I don't necessarily know why that was the case, but that just was, and as I got further in my studies, it was always the right fit. But I remember sitting in that office thinking, wow, I got exactly what I had been pushing for, right? Yeah. And our kids are exactly what we want, and this is great. And I remember we were booking, my brother was having his 40th birthday. I was supposed to fly up to Toronto in March just for the COVID. And we're like, should I take the flight? Oh, it's better not. Yeah. And then boom, we couldn't travel, again for a couple of years. But those are the credentials sort of leading up. And the institution had committed, at least 3 years to me going into this, as a...
The University of Calgary.
The University of Calgary and the Alberta Children's Hospital, Alberta Health Services, with the recruitment package, but also the protected time and the startup funding to do this. So yeah, that's the background coming in.
Yeah, I'm curious because, I'm having all the things that you've always desired happen. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the world gets turned upside down. Yeah. What was your process in terms of taking in information about the pandemic, about COVID and the risk, in that early part when you were, they were saying, oh, it would be amazing if we had this vaccine. We shouldn't rush it though, and we got to at least on some level get to herd immunity. Let's do 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Because I think 2 weeks to flatten the curve was at what time?
Oh, so
that was early, right?
That was early. That was, probably March, April 2020.
That was fast.
Yeah, 2 weeks turned into 2 years very, very quickly. That's right.
I always say it's like 2 weeks to flatten the human spirit.
Yeah. Oh, they did a remarkable job doing that.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'm curious, like you're clearly like master's in public health. You have all these training in medicine. What is the assessment at that time?
Well, when this was coming down, I guess I had over the preceding, at least 5 years, especially because what Canadians don't realize is the echo chamber. You're surrounded by the media here in Canada.
Yeah.
So just living in the States for 6 years, you get exposed to the other side of the opinion, whether you like it or not.
Same, yeah.
And here it's suppressed, right?
Yeah.
So I was aware of things kind of coming down, not aware, but just following things prospectively with a very, I guess, careful eye. And I realized, wow, these things are not, all as chalked up to be. And then the pandemic started coming through. And, personally, as, we were being told once in a lifetime thing. And, so I was all over looking into this.
Same.
Because, I felt responsibility for it. But the first thing I looked into was, possible, one was risk. Who's at risk? Like, do I need to separate myself from my family and my kids if I'm still going to the hospital?
Yeah.
The answer was no. My kids have got zero risk. We knew that within a month. Studies published in the New England Journal of Medicine looking at kids who were susceptible, who were admitted to hospital in Wuhan, the epicenter, for respiratory illness. And they found like influenza A, B, then COVID was number 3 or 4 down the list, and they had 3 kids die out of 1,500. So we knew that these were sick kids who died. So with that being said, you knew that it's not going to come through and just destroy my kids. So then you started looking, well, what can I do to help the situation? So you start looking into treatment, and then I end up discovering this whole lost treatment arm of viral treatment, which we totally don't get taught anything about in medical school. Lysosomal tropic agents is one of the classifications, just changing the pH inside the cell. And things like hydroxychloroquine can do that, So then you start following the people who are talking about these things, right? And the reality,
you want to get more information.
Get more information. So who were reliable and who were starting to talk about things at this time, right? And there were people who started publishing in the first 6 months on this, like Dr. Peter McCullough and a group big, showing that many governments, not just third world countries, but other countries in Europe, Brazil, at least tried to treat this, with over-the-counter stuff, vitamin D, zinc. They actually, for a couple of dollars, they were handing out these packs to help treat their patients. And he was documenting this. Meanwhile, our Canadian medical associations sending us letters telling us not to use hydroxychloroquine. And I'm thinking to myself, this is weird. I've never been told not to use this. I'm like, so then I looked into hydroxychloroquine. Why are you telling me not to think about this? Well, it turns in, I was in Hamilton, McMaster at the time of SARS-CoV-1. Which was the first round of SARS-CoV-2. So they knew within very early that chloroquine was effective at it.
And with SARS-CoV-1.
With SARS-CoV-1, which is why a lot of people jumped on that with SARS-CoV-2 right away.
Yeah, and there was no blockage of it back then.
There was no blockage.
Yeah.
And then, so then it started to build up some, because the evidence for it was pretty good. And then, President Trump at the time pushed it. And then that, all hell broke loose at that point. But they published 2 papers, one in Lancet, one in New England Journal of Medicine, stating that, hydroxychloroquine at pretty high doses, but it was causing these, heart arrhythmias, which had never been reported from what I understand by the cardiologist. And it was because of that fact that people sort of looked into it to see what's going on. Well, it turns out those 2 papers were completely 100% fabricated by the same group, or maybe 2 separate groups. But
they were retracted.
They were retracted, but by that point, the damage was done. Trump was called out for pushing something that was killing people.
Yeah, it became political.
It became political, but it's also talks about the fraudulent and the state of academic medicine. I mean, there are people who, I can show you quotes from the, Lancet, New England Journal of Medicine editors. The guy, Dr. Gotsky, the guy who started the Cochrane Foundation just this week, is talking about just how corrupt the medical profession is. So you have 2 papers published in 2 of the most, high impact journals, shut down, a good effective treatment. And people are going to say, well, there's no evidence for that. Well, there is reasonable evidence. There's also very good evidence that doesn't cause harm at the low doses. So why aren't we trying anything, right?
Yeah, because this is pre-treatment.
So it segues into your vaccine question, right? Yeah. But so those were the things that I was following, was risk and what, types of treatment-wise things could you look at? And, one of the things that it turns out that is the most effective, are things like just nasal sprays and throat sprays, things that, kill viruses on contact.
In the upper respiratory,
the nose and the back of your throat. Yeah. I just, you spray with this, small percentage betadine, iodine spray. I do that, all the time. And when you get sick, you ramp that up. And, vitamin D, everybody in Canada is vitamin D deficient in the winter, It's hard to check vitamin D levels in Alberta. I have to send a separate requisition to check vitamin D levels. I can do it for my epilepsy patients, but not everybody. I remember that in the States too, I had to write letters in support of patients who had their vitamin D checked. Like, what is that about? You'll pay for the EMU mission, but so, and then, just along those lines, to finish that thought, the Ontario Science Committee, COVID Science Committee, we're kind of following, and there are a lot of conflicts of interest in that group. But they published a document, the treatments for COVID, and the ones that you would, that the FDA is pushing, the standard ones. But they had a box saying, contraindicated or not contraindicated or recommended against.
Yeah.
And recommended against included hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, and vitamin D. So now you're recommending against vitamin D at a time, which is the fall, in a population that's going to be vitamin D deficient for something that we know is not just important for bone health, but it's incredibly important for the immune system health. So this is, so I'm thinking to myself, this is weird. We're not making any efforts to try to treat this stuff, and we're putting all of our eggs in this vaccine basket, right? Which, was a completely novel technology, right? So then you start to learn about the shots, right? Which would have been in, that would have been April, May, June, because the reality was, within the 6 months of that, their Operation Warp Speed was rolling out and things were going down. I mean, Pfizer started enrolling patients in November, December, for sure December of 2020.
Yeah.
So, that initial 3-month data actually got suppressed. We had lawyers had to go to find it. They had 1,223 deaths in the first 3 months. And so, you start looking, and then really by the time I wrote my letter worried about the shots, the two issues were the mandates, because Alberta Health Services had decided that they had implemented a bylaw to my contract stating that I needed to abide by the COVID-19 immunization policy, which, we had taken the stand, my lawyer and two other physician colleagues who went to court against Alberta Health Services, that, this was a complete violation of our constitutional rights. I mean, I don't even have to declare my vaccination status to you, especially if you're going to use that to fire me. And so we did. We went to court with them for, to discuss that. But the bigger issue right at that time, was the fact that these were going to for sure be approved in kids. I mean, it was a completely done deal. You could tell by that point. So
yeah, you could, because they were. I remember that if it got approved for kids, it actually qualified for something else in terms of legality in the States.
The 2 points I think you're so if from what I understand, if a vaccine gets onto a child pediatric schedule, right, then it provides additional protection, because it's protected
immunity,
under
right, legally.
The Vaccine Protections Act 1986 that came in under Reagan, which gives the vaccine manufacturers immunity from any indemnity from any injury, because they argue that vaccines are inherently unsafe. So that all started, right from 1986. So there's protection by getting it onto the record. The other thing was if there's no early treatment that's effective, then those studies I alluded to, the out of hospital early treatment, in some of these studies, 70-80% effective at avoiding hospitalization.
Right.
Can you imagine 70-80% less of the hospitalizations? They, commenting about hospitals are packed, and which was actually another lie. I can prove that with the Alberta data. But they're not even willing to try the most basic things, right? So the point is, if you have an effective treatment, well, we're not going to allow a vaccine under emergency use
especially
authorization.
a rushed one.
That's right.
It's interesting because, like, as you're processing that way, my journey is that I'm not in the world of looking at that stuff anymore. I'm super interested in like metabolic health, all that stuff from a personal interest. I'm interviewing people about that, about fitness, relational health, right? Because to me, it always just comes back to taking the best care of ourselves so we can be the highest performing possible person relationally, but in life. And so I'm, at the same time, have training and reading clinical trials and criticizing them. I spent 14 years in that industry. I've launched drugs. I was real good at it. I won awards for how good I could create networks of influence. I never thought this like deep understanding of human behavior would merge with this former job that I had. And so I'm like, I have a friend on who's a physician to talk about the risk and to give people ideas about how they can raise their immune response using things like vitamin D. And this is all pre-shot. So I'm like thinking I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just doing what I've always done, which is just ask questions, be curious, challenge systems, right? Like that's just an interest of mine, is to like really gather information. So I'm reading the clinical trials as they're coming out. And I'm having a conversation with a friend who's like, this product, and I'm watching the marketing messaging that's preparing. The lockdowns already, I'm starting to get a bit of a, like something's up. That's not data approved, but I'm in. Like I'm in. I want, this to go away. I don't have a deep understanding of what's happening. The mask stuff starts to come out. Don't use them, do use them. And I know you published something on that. So as all this is happening, because like a lot of the public perception of me is just a snapshot that I was speaking out. So then I'm now considered a right-wing anti-vaxxer. And I'm like, well, shit, I got all the shots, more than I would actually have desired now. But I'm curious about it, and I'm asking questions, and they launch this and they go with this message that it's going to get us to herd immunity and that it reduces transmission. Now here, from a marketing perspective, I'm thinking, well, I know that it's illegal to promote a product for anything it's not indicated for. I'm a rep. You're not allowed to do that, although the industry certainly does it. So I'm thinking, okay, well, do they have a paper that they can hold this message by? So I'm reading the clinical trials. I'm talking to this friend who's hyper pro, and he says to me, well, you got to take it. It's going to get people to herd immunity. I'm like, buddy, there's not even evidence that this is a sterilizing vaccine. And for those of you watching or listening, that means that it actually stops transmission. So I'm like, there's no clinical endpoint. And he's like, you think you're smarter than virologists and immunologists? And I'm like, no, I'm just actually just telling you the truth. There's no endpoint in the clinical trial looking at it. And I'm like, even the 95 or 99% reduction marketing message is a relative risk reduction. It's not an absolute risk, and it's really beautiful statistics. But they lead with this message that it's 99% effective, and what they allow people to think about that is at reducing transmission, not symptomatic illness. But then add on, because already now I'm like, wait, that doesn't make sense. They promote it in pregnant women. I'm like, well, this goes against the precautionary principle. So I just say that, like, I don't understand how they can promote this. It doesn't make sense to me. But again, I'm not like, this product sucks, because I am seeing the data early that shows that it's actually potentially quite effective. But what's happening in my mind, and I'm just sharing all this so I can get your thoughts, is that I used to sell a product that used the PCR test. So I'm like, just by happenstance, I know how the PCR test works. So I'm like, I remember we would say, you can't use the PCR test to diagnose anything. Even the guy who created it, I know, said that. So I'm going like, okay, am I dumb? Like, am I crazy? Because that doesn't make sense. The cycle counts that they're using, and you can learn more about it, but there's like the amount of cycles, which is basically the amount of magnifications, the cycle threshold. I mean, even Fauci is documented saying anything over 35 is considered dead nucleotide. And if you magnify enough, you'll find anything. And here are these labs that are doing at least 35, if not 40 as the cycle thresholds. So I'm going like, I gotta at least share this, but everyone thinks I'm a right-wing anti-vaxxer, but I'm not. I'm just like, why does no one know this? And why is no one having a debate? Because when I was in pharma, if there was a critical conversation, you would at least witness at a symposium opposing views. Sometimes, if it was really funded by pharma, you didn't witness that. So I'm dumping all that because I'm like, you're a physician, you're watching a similar thing happen. And I'm just like a guy who worked in pharma. So like,
everything you said on the science aspect is 100% right. And there's a lot to go there, but I'll say a few points. So one, the PCR component of this is huge. It's massive. And
Yeah.
even in the British Medical Journal at the time, and I remember sending this to my friends who didn't believe it, even though it was published in the British Medical Journal, they were talking about 1 to 4% false positive rate. So that means,
Right.
if you force test 100 people, you get 4 false positives, right? So, and they ran with this at a time where they were telling us that you could pass this through asymptomatic transmission.
Oh my God.
That's one of the only inaccurate components of my, it is probably the only inaccurate component, but I knew it was inaccurate at the time I put it in my letter to the college in the fall of 2021, because the college was thinking about mandating the shot as part of my license. So, I lost my job at the Children's, and I'm not, there as a professor, we're doing research there anymore.
So everything they gave you, heavily recruited.
Yeah, no, that was taken away.
Taken off.
We can talk about that, but I've also talked a lot about that. But the reality, so those things were taken away. In that letter, I mentioned, a hypothetical risk to my patients using, because I'm obviously not going to go to work if I'm sick.
Right.
So, this is based on a 50% asymptomatic transmission rate. I wrote out a calculation, which was, what will my risk to my patients be, to prove that there was no risk to my patients.
Right.
But the reality is, even at that time, there was good data to show that, asymptomatic spread only accounts for like 5% or less.
Yeah.
And, even head of the COVID science committee here in Alberta has admitted that, he admitted that early. So that the PCR was huge. You got a whole bunch of people that are being tested who are asymptomatic, being told to quarantine, blah, blah,
with
blah.
high cycle thresholds.
With the cycle threshold.
Yeah.
So, a lot of people have referred to the PCR pandemic. Reiner Fuellmich was one of the first people to start interviewing people about this. So absolutely at that time, there is a ramp up of this pandemic. And, you're right about what Kerry Mull said. He died, interestingly enough, just a few months before the pandemic, and he was outspoken adversary of Fauci. So you had the PCR part of it. The lockdown part, you start with 2 weeks, but by the time you start getting into months, basic health policy, Masters of Public Health 101, socioeconomic determinants of health. It's not just, do I have chronic illness? It's, emotional, all the things you talk about are very important. From the perspective, it matters, if you're elderly and you want people to take care of you, it matters how many daughters you have versus sons. You can have 5 sons, but as long as you have 1 daughter, you got a better chance of being taken care of. When you get older. We know these things. So you lock down people's ability to earn an income. You force all these kids who get, reprieve from bad environments at home. You have all these, feeding school children at school programs who don't get breakfast at home. All these. And then the mental part, the depression,
the loneliness,
and anxiety.
the relating.
What I saw that first year in my clinic were psychiatric manifestations of the lockdown. You have a football player who's very active, and all of a sudden, boom, he's not allowed to do any physical activity. He deconditions really, really quickly, and then he develops POTS, autonomic instability. Just because can't keep the blood pressure up. He's feeling dizzy. We had a whole bunch of, it's called TikTok ticks. All these people were developing ticks in the community. Some people would come into my
TikTok ticks.
TikTok ticks. So I see motor disorders, including tics and Tourette syndrome. During the first year, this is published in literature, there was an increase in that. And some of it, not all of it, wasn't just physiologic. Some of it was psychiatric, and some of it was mass psychosis, in the sense of, you got a whole bunch of teenagers who are reading about it and seeing it on TikTok, and so they'd come into my clinic and they know all the criteria for you. So you have to sort of through that. But the reality was that that the lockdowns are going to cause incredible harm. So you've now two those are so that was remarkable. With respect to the shots, what you're saying, completely novel technology. They literally changed the definition of what a vaccine was September 9th, 2021.
We'll link all this stuff in the show notes to
include this stuff.
Yeah.
You're forcing your body to produce a foreign protein based on a genetic sequence. And I can spare all the background going into why you need to be worried about this, but going in, we had things like antibody-dependent enhancement that was a concern. The idea that if subsequent exposures to the virus after multiple vaccine injections, you're going to be more prone to getting sick. That's actually why these things had never come into humans, because all the animal trials the animals had died in subsequent exposures so we knew that there were these concerns, at the time, just common sense. I mean, you were called a right-wing anti-vaxxer. I got called a right-wing anti-vaxxer as well. And here, my kids at that fully vaccinated to everything. I've defended vaccines in clinic, in retrospect, and sometimes maybe I shouldn't have, but I was a full hook, line, and sinker on all of this stuff. Even flu shots with my kids to that extent. To work at Mayo Clinic and at Sick Kids, they wanted us to have the yearly flu shot. Like, you could opt out, but you had to have a reason, and I never had a reason, so I just took them all the time. So I was never like that. But boom, all of a sudden, a novel experimental genetic injection, just putting a pause on this. Now you're an anti-vaxxer. So that was. Absolutely was the name calling. There are articles, I testified, I included these links to this on CBC, articles showing that our military was running a propaganda, a psychology experiment against us. And when they were caught, doing it, they said they were going to stop. And then I have the second article a few months later showing that they continued.
They never stopped.
We were under incredible amount of, lockdown, take you away from your friends. I mean, my grandfather, God rest his soul, he was 101, and he died before the shots came out, thank God. But from the sense that he didn't have to go through, that part of it. But he spent the last 6 months, not eating because he couldn't get visitors, right? In Alberta, we sacrificed our elderly, we put them, people don't realize this, but, think, our elderly are what clogged up the ICUs. All elderly were not given ICU beds. They were just left to die in their homes. I mean, you can see that based on the provincial numbers. That is an absolute fact. We treated our elderly. So all that psychiatric stuff that we did, had that not been there, my grandfather very well could have continued for a little bit longer, right? That emotion. But everybody has got
connection.
Everybody has
human connection.
That's right. Everybody's got stories like that. You got kids dying in the children's hospital. You've got siblings are not allowed to come in and visit during these times. Like we broke.
That's so inhumane.
This story. Sister-in-law's father was in Spain just at the breakout, and ended up having a cancer in his back, and he had to get transported right when COVID was breaking out, and he ended up being COVID positive. And he was COVID positive when he got back to Canada. They left him in a room, no visitors, paralyzed from so it was the things we did to people during this time, like the lack of humanity. Like, you get emotional thinking about it. You want to cry. But what do we know about the effectiveness and transmission, to the last part of your point? So we know Cecilia Lourenco, who signed off on Canada's vaccine, the COVID vaccine, testified in Premier Brian Peckford's case against the charter violations, his inability to travel because of the shot, that, absolutely these things were never tested to stop transmission. It was never one of the primary outcome measures. Janine Small testified in the European Union, same thing. She actually giggled in this way that you just want to the lack of humility and wisdom is shocking. Were these things tested to stop transmission? Of course they weren't. We were moving at the speed of science. That was her answer, right? So these things were never tested to do that. At the time that the mandate, so what was the proof in the real world at the time? So by fall 2021, keep in mind, you could look at Israel and UK, because
they were about 6 months ahead, right?
They were 3 months ahead of us.
3 months, yeah.
The head of Israel's health testified at the FDA. I've got the video. This was in the fall. And I put this in my letter to the college as well. 60% of the ICU admissions in Israel in the fall 2021 were in the double vaccinated. So not only did this not stop transmission,
the antibody-dependent enhancement you're talking about.
Well, that's another part of it. But just in terms of how did it do after you've had 2 shots?
Yeah.
60% of the ICU admissions in Israel at the time were in the double vaccinated. So here I am being told that if you don't take this shot, you're going to lose your job. But, based on what? My risk from COVID is a fraction of zero, especially if I do anything to take care of myself, early treatment wise. These things don't stop the transmission. So I'm not putting anybody at risk from that. And then from my own serious illness perspective, and these numbers become even more ridiculous when you look at the kids, right? Because their risk from this disease is even more minuscule than a 45-year-old man.
Right.
And so, absolutely, it was, very evident at that point. We know another point, the CDC director, Rochelle Walensky, in early August 2021, this is just before AHS, and the college was thinking of mandating these things. She stated on mainstream media in the States, what we know now is that these things don't stop transmission. Well, we actually know by FOIAing their documents that they knew that these things didn't stop transmission in early 2021.
January, I think.
January,
right?
February. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I remember that.
So, you know, and our own federal government was, you know, Dr. Theresa Tam and our Prime Minister himself, you know, were out there telling us these things didn't stop any, you know, the testing steps. These things, you know, blah blah blah. They wouldn't be approved if they
weren't safe
and effective, right?
Yeah.
And now, you know, Anthony Housefather testified because they were, you know, people were pushing them for the contracts with Big Pharma, which are secret. We're not allowed to look at them. They do provide complete indemnity to the manufacturers, and he acknowledged this in his statement. He said, well, of course, you know, we had to give these to pharmaceutical companies. We were asking them to do something that they, in an unprecedented way, in a speed that they have never done before, products that usually take 12 to 15 years to test properly, we were asking to roll them out in 6 months. I mean, obviously these are experimental,
yeah,
you know, which directly contradicts, you know, Dr. Theresa Tam and what Trudeau said to us. So they've known about these things, and lie to our faces about them.
Yeah.
You know, and that's without any.
That's documented.
That's documented.
So again, as like that's all unfolding that you're talking about, I'm watching this happen and I'm going, okay, well, I'm going to wait because this is novel. I've read about the animal studies. I'm a little concerned. I know my risk factors. I know that I'm actually, my risk is, it's almost zero. And I'm reading like one of the most published, I believe, is he a physician in public health, but a researcher, Ioannis. Mm-hmm. He's at Stanford, I think, at the time. Yeah, so I'm thinking like, okay, I've now interviewed Jay Bhattacharya. He's talking about how like lockdowns are like we threw out all actual pandemic plans in the garbage. He's like, what we're presenting is nothing novel, nothing crazy. It's not let her rip. He's like, protect the people who are at highest risk and then mitigate the level of mental health challenges, you know, because I'm also early on when I'm learning about lockdowns and thinking about it, I'm like, I guarantee that the cost of these is going to be greater than the benefit. Mm-hmm. You know, this is as I'm watching, 2 more weeks, and I'm watching people losing their mind because there's this high level of circulating anxiety, which, you know, from a marketing perspective is brilliant, from a public health perspective is actually highly costly, but brilliant if you want to bring in a solution that you want everyone to take. But the lying about transmission, which also led to lying about herd immunity, which also gave this promise to people. That's where I was really frustrated because I was looking at like, you're not being honest and you think you don't need to be honest because you're being noble. But people, what's now happening, because you're talking about September 2021, I'm listening to our Prime Minister because I'm thinking, I don't want to actually get this because I'm watching the data in Alberta, Ontario, around the world. I'm seeing the data in the UK and in Israel. And I'm going, this makes no sense for me to get. It doesn't stop transmission. I have a wife who's from the States. I work in the States. I need to go back and forth. I have a work visa, but that was only going to be allowed for so long. And so I'm like balancing all these things. I need to be able to continue. I've got all these pressures. I've got people who think I'm an anti-vaxxer, people who I love dearly, who now are like, Mark, what's wrong with you? And so I'm like holding all this tension, which you're holding all this tension. And I'm thinking to myself, like, they're weaponizing shame and belonging. And then I'm reading the studies, I believe it's at Harvard, I can't remember, but where they're actually testing what messages will work in order to increase adoption of these products. Nudge tactics, which I can understand the benefit of those for some things, of course. So I'm like, man, I feel like I'm losing my mind. People think I'm crazy. I don't think I'm crazy because I'm like actually consuming all this information and learning so much. And I'm open to this. I'm seeing the benefit of the product early. Anyways, I look at the Alberta data and getting back a little to the details, which a lot of you might not know, is that they would qualify a hospitalization or a death as unvaccinated if it was within 14 days of the first shot or the second. And I'm going, well, when they actually released the data in Alberta, I remember by accident, you saw that a lot of the positive cases and the deaths of unvaccinated people were vaccinated people in those first 14 days. I remember that data being released and then taken off the internet. And I'm going, well, if these products are really great, first off, you can already see that the hospitalizations per 100,000, so it's the denominator, makes them comparable groups, is actually higher in the vaccinated group. And then I'm looking at the Cleveland Clinic data, I'm looking at all this stuff, and I'm going, if it's so good, why are you now taking the data off? Like, I should be able, as an unvaccinated person, look at this data and go, I gotta get it. Like, look at it, it's overwhelming, but it wasn't. And so, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, so in the context of all the psychiatric stuff that was going on through the lockdowns, military style propaganda, then they turn on the unvaccinated in a hate way that, full front page Toronto Star, wish the unvaccinated dead. 30% of our friends, or our fellow Canadians thought we should be in jail for our views. And so there was a lot of hate on at that time, right? And you've already talked about some of the biggest lies. I mean, we know, early treatment lie, the actual risk of, your personal risk, the exponentially increased risk as you go up in age. Asymptomatic transmission you talked about the PCR test. One of the other big ones that you mentioned just now briefly was the natural acquired immunity, right? So they, because by the time these things started coming out in Canada, 30-50% of Canadians had antibodies against SARS-CoV-2. So you didn't need to expose half the population to the shot, right? But if you are acknowledged, our God-given natural acquired immunity, well, then, maybe they still need the shot. But what was worse was that we had evidence at that point especially in the teenage males and young teenage adults, that they were at higher risk for myocarditis and pericarditis if they had taken a shot either after, getting COVID itself or, subsequent shots. So you were taking a group that was at like one of the lowest possible risks from this, giving them something that didn't stop transmission, and if they already had antibody acquired immunity, naturally, you were actually putting them at higher risk from, and they were willing to do that. So that lie has been acknowledged. There's a study that was published in Lancet and like rocks, absolutely, of course, our natural acquired immunity is something. So that was a massive. So then in terms of the overall effectiveness, we touched on that a little bit. So yeah, the fall of 2021, we knew based on, what was going to happen 3 months ahead of us, where we were standing. So what actually happened in Canada 3 months later? So then, Truckers Convoy comes around in December. If you look at Ontario's public data, if you look at Alberta's public data, which I know very, very well, we've taken screenshots on an active, basis for this thing for years. BC's provincial data showed this. Manitoba's provincial data show this. Relative to vaccine status, based 100,000 per 100,000 patients, you were twice as likely to get Omicron if you had 2 shots. So at a time that our Prime Minister was refusing to meet with the truckers because he got COVID for whatever time, despite all the shots he apparently took, and wouldn't even send anybody to discuss this very reasonable thing, the evidence was that the more shots you took, the more likely you were to get the disease. So, which is why they didn't show up for a debate that was housed, for people, and why they couldn't, they have to rely on the censorship and the defamation and the beatdown, because, the most basic facts going back, 2 years, as I said, have had to be suppressed, we'll talk, I'm sure, about safety in a second, but so that was right in, January 2022. And then, you move into the 3 months later, and now it wasn't just showing, okay, you're more likely at risk to get it if you had the shot. So in, I think, March, Alberta Health took down their public, as you say, they started to take this data down. And I could go on for 30 minutes about all the things they did to manipulate the data to make it look as strong as it was. I mean, some things that would make you just get so angry, including, and we should talk about how they actually defined vaccination status, because that's huge.
Share that.
But but it was 2 weeks post your second shot. So if you had taken the shot before that time, you were put in the bin of unvaccinated. And so, that changes the numbers quite a bit. And
that's tremendous influence.
I think if we could actually get a data set where, we have the day the person took a shot and then just followed them by that, the numbers 100% flip. There's examples of that. The data was, one of the data. So that's in the UK, they've had a COVID inquiry on this already, and there's a couple of really good Substacks talking about this. Dr. Norman Fenton, for instance. 30% of the deaths, like huge number of the deaths, were in patients who had already taken the shot. Alberta has what were called these rainbow graphs, and it showed, incidence of COVID-19, ICU admission, and death at the number of days post-shot. And immediately in the first 2 weeks of a shot, you actually have an increased risk of getting COVID, dying from COVID, and being hospitalized with or from COVID. And when this made international attention, this was back well before they took down the vaccine efficacy data by states. They took this down. Alex Berenson wrote a Substack on it. I was actually that morning, I was in a meeting with Dr. Byron Bridle and half a dozen conservative MLAs presenting data, showed them this rainbow graph, and then within hours that thing was gone because of Alex Berenson's Substack from 2 days before. So they don't want to say, and if there's some qualifier as to what, generally it's saying it increases vaccine hesitancy, but
that's such bullshit.
Yeah. I mean, so
if it's a natural response to the data, isn't that informed consent?
Well, everything that we're talking about should be made aware to people, right? And if you're not giving them the data on this stuff, or even worse, if you're coercing them through fear and keeping your job and all the rest of it, that's not informed consent, and that's a violation of the Health Professions Act. And so, any group that's standing in the way of physicians who are on the front line and seeing these things, from just speaking the truth, I'm pointing to Alberta's own data, for instance, that they took down. That's a fact. I remember showing that data to some of my colleagues at the Children's Hospital. There are some people who would pull me aside and say, Eric, I said, let's look at the provincial data right now. And then their jaws drop, right? So when Alberta took it down in March, I think 2022, the triple vaxxed were the highest risk relative to vaccine status to get COVID. Then they kept showing based on serious illness, and keep in mind in the official numbers, these are with or from COVID, hospitalizations and deaths. We know that half of those numbers were died with and not from COVID. So there's an amplification in the death toll. Substantially. The point I want to make in terms of another egregious hiding of the data, in the fall, when we were being told we had to take the shot, and you're trying to figure out, to take the shot, and we're all being told we're crazy. And the Alberta data said, 70 to 80% of the deaths were in the unvaccinated, right? That was the message we were all being told. 80% of the people dying are the unvaccinated, right? Well, that denominator, time denominator, started in January 2021. We didn't even get to 50% uptake of the vaccine until the summer. So Alberta Health included all the deaths for an entire year, including 6 months when the vaccine wasn't available.
Yeah, so comparing
you had 100% of the deaths were in the unvaccinated in the first 6 months because the vaccine wasn't available.
No one was vaccinated.
Nobody's vaccinated. But that they included that.
That's so dirty.
Oh, it's so dirty, right? So these are the kind of things. And then you fast forward 3 more months, and when Alberta took this down, Alberta Health took down in June 2022, they took down all of the admissions and deaths by vaccine status. It showed that 55% of the deaths were in the triple vaccinated. Just over, I think, 83% were the 2+ vaccinated.
And this was all normalized with the same denominator, so you could compare the groups. Because that was often the argument, like, oh, you can't compare. Yeah, you can, because you create the same denominator.
You can, if you want to get into some like obscure statistical bias and what's happening at this point, you can, to some extent, but it doesn't account for it. And when you're telling me that I still need to take these shots, this evidence at least blows that out of the water. If you don't want to let this data indicate antibody-dependent enhancement or some vaccine-induced enhancement, which we sort of alluded to a few times, which I think this data shows to some extent, that's fine, but it definitely destroys their narrative. So, our provincial, and this happened everywhere, I've got screenshots from the BC system and Ontario as well, they all took these things down in the name of, vaccine hesitancy.
See, that to me is like, it's just so dirty because the data is not showing what they desire it to show. So instead of actually just acknowledging the truth, which you could all see, but only people who were looking for this data found it, because you're not hearing this on CBC, CTV, CNN. Like the States is having a similar thing going on. The world, like the marketing message and the global organization of the marketing of this product, and also all these news organizations, which most people don't know about this, but like signing up for the Trusted News Initiative, where they'll all create the same messaging. So coordinated messaging. And so as I'm watching, you know, for example, if I'm saying something like, hey, you know what, guys, I'm not going to get this right now because there's no long-term data. I would hear someone say to me, well, actually, these have been around for ages. And as a pharmaceutical rep, I would kind of chuckle at that, because when I was launching a product or selling a product, you'd get the most common objections you'd get, and then you got the answers to the most common objections. So actually, there is long-term, And I noticed that people were being trained to be basically pharmaceutical reps to overcome objections of their friends. So as all that's happening, I'm watching the States where Biden's going like, it's going to be a winter of death for the unvaccinated. I'm seeing how that language is now ingraining this division and dehumanization. I'm thinking of Brene Brown's work, where she talks about dehumanization always begins with language. It starts because what happens is, as humans, we won't harm people who we see as like us. But if you look, the language starts to move them out of the circle, and we start to lose empathy, and we're willing to actually cause great harm now to these people. So I'm watching Justin Trudeau, and I'm sure for people around the world, fucking Australia or New Zealand and the UK and the US too, maybe not quite as much.
Five Eyes Nations.
Yeah, the Five Eyes Nations, which everything we're saying is fact, which is really fascinating, because for a lot of people, they're like, it causes so much dissonance that I get it. It's like hard to hold. It's easier to just call someone an anti-vaxxing right-winger, which was perfectly designed as a trope to just cancel any dissent or disagreement. But I watch our prime minister go from Canada as a place that would never bring in. So I'm going, I'm talking to one of my family members, and she's saying to me, oh, yeah, right. Like, get ready. The camps are coming. I'm like, nah, they'd never do that. Canada? They'd never do that. Then I start to see the fucking hotels being set up, and I'm like, oh my God, like the idea of my country is starting to fall apart. And then I see Justin Trudeau call an election, and just like clockwork, September 2021, known the product doesn't stop transmission, is starting his wedge issue messaging to try to win a majority government, which he has documented saying previously, you can use a wedge to win, but the consequences are devastating. And he says, you will not sit on a plane, a train, or a bus beside an unvaccinated. Yeah, those words, if you were open, would rock your heart. You know, I was like, there it is. That's the permission now for everybody to be divided. And you think.
Exactly, the permission.
Right, and now modeled by a leader, quote unquote. But, and you see the messaging from the Toronto Star, you see the coordinated campaign. You've got Fissman's studies, which is, there's a book written about how fraudulent that is, where it's just sad that Canada, as a place that I really believe that the heart of the people and the heart of people in general is that they really want to do good and they want to care for other people. And the shadow side of that desire is that when it's weaponized against us, we are actually willing to create great harm in the service of good. And so I watched now this rule go in. I remember having dinner in BC, September 2021, in Tofino. And my wife and I, fiance at the time, were like, oh, we can't have dinner anywhere tomorrow, because it was going in the next day, the vaccine passports. And I was like, it's just so crazy that as a healthy, I had a friend who wouldn't hug me because I wasn't vaccinated.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, none of this makes sense. Like, it's not logical, it's emotional. And so, yeah, it just breaks my heart because the people who are unvaccinated weren't the only ones dehumanized. Everybody was dehumanized.
We were all, I mean,
everyone's a victim.
We still are not, we still are not getting full disclosure on these products.
No.
I mean, even 6 months ago, right, we just found out, the DNA contamination and the inclusion of the SV40 promoter, which we don't have to get into. But the reality is nobody received informed consent, and they weaponized our virtue against us.
Yes, exactly.
And,
our kindness.
Canadians are known for that, trusting. We've been so many generations separated from badness now that most people don't remember what that was like. And they came up and they used that against us. And then, it went from, do the right thing because it's the right thing to, we hate you, and using the numbers that I'm saying were manipulated the way that I can show. The documentation now through FOIA where they knew that they were telling lies going back all the way through.
But willing to just lie.
Willing to sort of do this. I mean, I know, obviously everyone, all of us had friends with, colleagues, all sorts of things that went sideways here during that time. I mean, I can tell you, after my letter came out, the Children's Hospital became a very difficult place to be.
Oh, I couldn't even imagine.
And one instance, I had, a woman who was an administration assistant, I won't say what department, who had been there forever. And she came into my office in tears. And she came to my office because she knew that I would listen to the story because I had written the letter and that I had just been sort of attacked at a town hall anyways. But she was just told by, extremely senior physician who knew that she was unvaccinated, that he would let an unvaccinated person die in his operating room. And, this is unfathomable.
Yeah.
The people of the Children's Hospital are like, they're good people. They've dedicated their lives taking care to hear but that was the level, and I had that, I saw that, as you can imagine, front line and center. That being said, there were a lot of people who could see what was going on and didn't want to say, good job, but don't say anything too loud. But I think what really happened in that fall, but as you were trying to sort this out, I was going through it as well. I think that's why the truckers movement was so powerful for so many of us, is because we realized that we were not alone. And the world is going, completely off a cliff. And because I'm standing up saying, whoa, this is right, I'm crazy, right? But then we realized that, we're not the ones who are crazy here. And we were able to find each other at a time that was really, really important. And so that I'll forever, ever be very grateful for the truckers. It was really tough. Right.
I had the same sort of hope brought into me through watching that. And I was in the States at the time and I couldn't come back and forth because I was like, man, I'd be getting in my car or plane, which I wouldn't have been allowed to do.
Yeah, that's right.
But I would have gone out there, and I remember watching it all on social media, and actually there being a lot of excitement from a lot of people I knew who were maybe even a bit pro, but they were like against what was going on mandate wise and the way people were being treated.
Yeah.
And then I watched the media and the planned takedown, turning it into this racist white supremacy rally. And I'm like, and I had to have a call with a friend because she was really upset with me that I had supported this and support it. And I, again, was like, am I crazy? Because I'm not there. I'm not on the ground.
Yeah.
But I have friends who are there.
Yeah.
And I'm going, is it? And they're like, no, there is so much love here.
Yeah, that's what it was.
And, I can understand, of course, the resistance of people in the neighborhood with honking and all that. I get it.
Yeah.
So it's not negating people's experience. But like one of the most peaceful, largest, most peaceful protests around the world, probably ever. And, at the same time, you're watching like previously, like a Black Lives Matter riots, which I understand and validate the need for something like that. But I was also like, wait, why are those not super spreader
burning
events?
down cities.
Yeah, like why is there just not an accurate, and I get it because there's a fear of again, using tropes like being called a racist. I totally understand that. But I'm thinking like those aren't super spreader events that the government and media are talking about. They're supporting them. but they're not at least criticizing them in a valid way. That, hey, what about these super spreader events? But then you see this come up. Yeah. You see the trucker convoy come up, and, you know, I see your emotion in that, and I get it. It was like,
well, we were all being told that we were bad humans.
Yeah.
We were crazy, right?
Yeah.
And when you're being forced to make decisions, like, as I said, we started this at, you know, you're at the peak of where you think, you know, at the start of your career, really, you know, got
your dreams are being realized.
And it's like, well, to stand firm on this is, you know, I have no choice because it's the truth. But, you know, it's a lot there. But that was the reality of Ottawa on the ground, you know. And I grew up in Ottawa, so I can tell you, been a lot of Canada Day festivities. It was incredible. All walks of life, you know, young, old, every color, you know, lots of Native Canadians were out there. There, you know, truth and freedom cuts through every, you know, imaginary division, right? That they, you know, they've got us fighting against each other. But the reason it was like that so much was because people had, you know, it was an expression of just, you know, the pure beatdown for so long. And to be around people that saw it, you know, it was very, 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 very powerful, which is why they have to do something extraordinary. You know, he brings out the, you know, War Measures Act, calls it something different, you know, the Emergencies Act.
Yeah.
And then, you know, there had been no violence attributed in that area. I mean, the crime was down. I can tell you, almost every corner, free food. People were giving out clothing. It was freezing, 20 minus 30 out there. You know, when I get in there that first weekend, what did the government do? They locked all the outhouses on the outside. The restaurants, you know, they had already been shut down, but they made it miserable. And yet, you know, within no violence. You know, that defacement of the Terry Fox monument, you know, they clean that up, even if that was some people who were part of it. You know, the War Memorial was taken care of. I mean, the reality was, if you have video, and there's thousands of hours of video to see this. So if you still are in the camp that, you know, there were somehow people that were out to lunch on you know, not the government side, you really need to watch. You know, Spark Street, CBC has a site, has an office there. You know, it's a driver from 700, from there to where people were speaking on stage. Their office was closed the whole time. They weren't walking around with cameras. With the exception of those initial images, they didn't show anything, right? You know, I lost any lingering respect for any of those people. The CBC, mainstream media, you know, it turns out the Trusted News Initiative, most of the fact checkers, gone at that point. I mean, lying outright. And the evidence, I mean, I was shocked. I actually did a 10-minute video in front of the War Memorial at that thing, because I woke up on Monday. I don't think I had been so down. I'm like, this is Canada, you know. But, you know, my parents are like 10 minutes down the road, and they don't even know what's happening in their own town, right?
They're just watching.
They're just watching,
the news.
You know. Yeah. But the love there, you know, not just. And I realized that it was a massive inconvenience from the honking perspective, but you know, there are stories there that people don't even know. I mean, I was staying at the main hotel where a lot of this was happening. And, you know, there was a psychiatrist, a child psychiatrist office on the same street. And he had a kid coming in for a neurodevelopmental exam the next day that was going to take a long time. The kid had, you know, autistic tendencies, from what I understand. And he asked, you know, can you guys just not do this while we're doing the testing? And they shut it down during that time, right? You know, wow. But you know, how do you express yourself non-peacefully when the leader of our country won't even climb out from it to come talk to you? You know, it was so disruptive, but you can't even have a conversation about it.
And he's dehumanizing. He's using language that is, it would of course invoke rage. That's why I just had such a deep level of respect for, even despite all the anger that was rightfully being felt, and the sadness of, is this my country? That was the thing that I have and had been wrestling so much with, was like, this is not, I would always defend Canada. And then now when I go to the States, I'm telling you, almost everybody is like, what's happening up there? And I look now at all of it and I'm like, man, we've really, it revealed to me a lot. It revealed to me, like, my thought is that at the ethos of Canadian culture is that we never actually left Britain. And because we never actually left Britain, we don't have freedom at the core of our culture. And I can understand the shadow side of freedom is overt independence, and you see that sometimes in the US, of course. But in Canada, we're like, there's a joke around the world that we say sorry for everything, even things that are not our fault, which is really codependent, you know, and it's very conflict avoidant.
Yeah.
And like, if we do not find our balls, find like some level of resistance to what because, you know, now I'm like, understand how the Canadian political system works. I didn't before. I feel like I even hate to say this about myself, but I really, and it's so ignorant, but I really believed a democracy took care of itself. And that is so like, as I say it. So like, I used to feel like this isn't fair.
Yeah.
And that was true. It wasn't. And I mean, my Instagram account in 2020 was growing at 50 to 100,000 people a month following me. When I started speaking out or just like asking questions, I went to zero growth.
Yeah.
I never got a like, you violated the principles of Instagram. I never got that. But what I would see is that if I shared something from, you know, someone who was sharing factual information, I would notice that, like, let's say if I had an Instagram story up and it had, just for sake of numbers, like 10,000 views. The next, you know, logically, the newer one would have less. So 10,000, 9,500, 9,000, 8,700, whatever. I saw this one story. I'm like, I have 2 profiles. So I like am looking at my stories and I'm like, where'd that story go that I shared about the immense fines that Pfizer has paid historically for fraudulent marketing, etc. I'm like, I wonder if someone on my team deleted it. Like maybe I was getting a little too carried away and they're like, eh, we got to delete that one. So I go into my profile and I can't see it. But then I'm like, well, I tagged the person who originally shared it, Sean Stevenson, and I go to our chat because I know it would show up in the messaging. It's still there. So I open it, pops open. I slide up so I can see the metrics. 10,000, 9,500, 1,800 or 2,200. 8,700. So they had not been showing it.
Yeah.
And I sent it to a group, my men's group, and some of them live in different continents. And all the ones in North America were not getting it. It had just maybe not caught up to New Zealand or something. And so, yeah, like the experience of all of that, of being like, wow, there's like an active effort.
Yeah.
Even when I'm not doing anything wrong, I'm actually just criticize something that, if you really want to trust, you're a master's of public health. There has to be a line where you actually need to tell the people the truth, because that actually creates more trust when the truth is actually starting to become obvious.
Well, a lot of really, really good points there. You know, the longer you deny the truth, when the bodies and the data are what they are, you look like a fool. And so, you know, that's the case, I think, you know, with our current conservative leadership here in Alberta, right? You know, you've got new leadership for a year and a half, and these things are still being recommended. You know, these experimental genetic injections still being recommended to 6-month-olds, right? And there's been no accountability whatsoever for what's taken place. I mean, the Emergencies Act here in Alberta was declared ultra-vires illegal. People are not launching lawsuits against it, but no accountability. So as you say, you keep lying about these things when it's very, very obvious, you look bad. And so, you know, what are people doing? Well, they're talking, they're walking away from these shots, and you got less than 10% uptake on these shots. You know, what was the most important thing for that drop down? It was basically Omicron right after the truckers, you know, because that wave, people had taken 2 or 3 shots already and they got Omicron anyways. You know, the friends who I wasn't able to, which was most of my friends able to reach on this stuff early on, to sort of say, you know, are you sure you want, you know, that's when they stopped taking it. And that, you know, right at that time, like, why would I take something
when everything they were being told
it didn't make any sense, right? You know, you know, so, and then you get from the perspective of what does that mean from the health and the public health, you know, the trust and respect for the public health institutes. Now it's completely eroded and largely gone. I mean, look at the uptake on the current childhood vaccine schedule. I mean, it's plummeted.
Has it dropped a lot?
I haven't seen the most up-to-date accurate numbers, but it's plummeted. You know, we had like 95% plus uptake in Alberta on the childhood vaccine schedule, and that's not there anymore because people know they're being lied to on these COVID genetic shots. And so, you know, if you're lying to me about that, you know, what else? And the other thing it's done is that because people have you know, essentially woken up to things. It sounds like you've woken up a lot. I have, you know, big time as well. Then you start to question these things. You know, how is it that the data is as rock solid as it is, and we're still going down this road? You start asking, and you know, so you start realizing that there is more going on, you know, beyond just the medicine part of it. And you know, you feel fortunate that you have at least been woken up to what's happening. Because I don't think we're done yet. I mean, we're talking about disease X, the H5N1. I mean, I don't know if you guys, if your listeners have listened to the elite meeting with Dr. Theresa Tam and Dr. Bonnie Henry. So somebody was invited to the meeting, and that person videotaped and leaked the meeting with their health officials last week. I know I don't know that there's any wisdom or humility in that entire room. You know, they are giddy. Dr. Bonnie Henry's giddy about shutting down the minks industry, and because presumably they transmit these viruses. It's just shocking. You know, they absolutely are coming at us with another. You know, for instance, the H5N1. I mean, they've already purchased and have mRNA vaccines for this thing in the freezer.
I don't think people will take them up anymore.
Well,
I think 5%, maybe 10.
I like to think that too, because I think the most optimistic numbers that I've been watching all the way through have been what are people doing? Are they taking the shots or not?
People aren't taking the bivalents, which have no data.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's even, you know, you look at the H5N1. I looked at the original trials for this one, 0.5% death rate from the shots in the trial itself. You know, so 0.5%, that wasn't the infection fatality rate for most of us with COVID. So, you know, absolutely, you got to take these. And it's still what people don't know is that the mRNA has got issues in and of itself, and so is the lipid nanoparticle that it's housed in. Then it causes inflammation. So, anyways, just got to be watched because they haven't had accountability on these things. They're playing it again. And, you know, the willingness to sacrifice, you know, our elderly, as I say, we don't want our elderly taking up all the beds in the ICU, so we're not going to do anything for them. And we're going to use our kids as shields to protect us from these shots, even though these things don't stop transmission. Even though we know dozens of studies showing that kids do not transmit this to adults very well because they generally don't get sick from it. You have to have symptoms. You know, we in the fall, our last chief medical officer of health here in Alberta, Dr. Tina Henshaw, I mean, she came out and held a press conference about the first pediatric death with or from COVID. She claimed it was from COVID in Alberta. So that was a year and a half into the pandemic. Not a single child had died with or from COVID. The first was a teenager in the fall of 2021. She held a press conference. You know, 2 weeks before they're about to start pushing this on the children, that was the teenagers, the 11 to 18-year-olds, who were the most devastated group out of all of us.
Yeah.
You know, they were the most devastated. They were not allowed to go to school, like at a time where the social development is so huge, right?
Yeah.
All that stuff was, you know, they had to graduate on stage, you know. Anyways, so then they get an out of jail free card with this shot. So we had like 90% uptake in our 11 to 18-year-olds on the 2 shots. You know, fortunately that dropped down to 25 or 30%, you know, with the third. But you know, that was the reality. So, you know, she's trying to push that, and she gets out there and says, yeah, we just lost, you know, this unfortunate patient who passed away. His sister gets on social media the next day and says, you know, or even later that day, and says, listen, he had stage 4 brain cancer. He didn't die from COVID. He had a positive test in the late stages. He died from cancer, right? And to the point where she had to hold a second press conference the next day to apologize for that. So you're telling me the very first death, pediatric death in the province.
It's misinformation.
And you don't know that this person, like your second question is, what else did he have? So she knowingly went up there, lied about the fact that COVID killed this child, which it didn't, ignored the fact that he had, you know, stage 4 brain cancer. And when she got called out by a family member, she had to apologize, right? You know, that is blatant disinformation, you know, and ramping up fear and playing on emotions, you know, and you know, completely disqualifying for a health professional from my perspective. But they all did this. We can all document lots of this stuff, right? Even within, you know, you think, oh, it's just, you know, Dr. Theresa Tam and this chief medical officer of health. This stuff comes right down into the hospitals themselves. I mean, in my own hospital, the two people who are pushing the COVID shots the most, are infectious disease doctors. One, was the head of pediatrics for a very, very long time. There's an article in True North, you can find it. This individual received $5 million from Big Pharma over the 5 years preceding COVID, including 3 million from Pfizer, right? He was a primary investigator on the Moderna trial at the Children's from 5 months to 5 years.
Wow.
He received funding from community associations locally to go and pump this shot. I know Airdrie Hockey Association, different places, getting money for this. And meanwhile, he won't show up for a debate. He won't back up his numbers with anything, right? He'll and then there's an article about a pediatric ID doc at the UBC Children's as well. The point is, across the board, even down to your local hospitals and down to your local medical schools, because you got to remember, most people don't know this. I didn't know this until I started getting grants. But 30% of your grants go to the institution for indirects to manage the grant. So if you get $1 million, $300,000 goes to your school, right? You get $5 million. So now you're talking big money. And so that's the compromised situation, that we're in, all the way from local authorities all the way up to the very, very top. And as I say, they're gearing up for another round of this. But I'm optimistic that people are going to say no for the same reason, you are. One, despite everything we talked about, like the crazy, crazy propaganda, what we were up against, like 20% of us still said no,
Yeah.
And those people are incredible. Like we've gotten to know a lot of them actually over these years.
Same.
And they're all walks of life, right? But these are, Canada's not dead. It's just, we're regrouping right now, to a large extent. Then you've got the vaccine injured, right? I mean, we got a group that the government, the FDA went to court to prevent the release of the 6-month trial data. Why would you prevent the release of the 6-month trial data?
If there's no issues.
There are more deaths in the trial arm. There are other examples of the injury. We didn't really talk about that part of it, but the bottom line is those injuries are so enormous. And I can tell you that, I see them on a weekly basis in my clinic, people coming in all the time telling me these things. You get stories where, the doctors will admit that this is related to the shot, but, they won't put it in the chart. There's nothing to do about it. But so the point is, you got people who said no to the beginning. You've got people who have hurt or have been injured by this, which are an underrepresented group. There's no way that these people are going to do this. I mean, the number of women I've talked to who had menstrual cycle irregularities of these things.
Me too.
Postmenopausal women who develop. I mean, I remember being at a Christmas party that first year, and a woman pulled me aside. Is this related? They're not going to take any more of these things. So there's going to have to be. I don't know what is going to have to go along with this, but I do have to believe that 40-50% of Canadians are going to have are going to say no this time. More so than they did last time. But because there's been no accountability, and because we really haven't had, any massive court cases, and because the Constitution, Canadian Charter, doesn't look like it's worth anything that's written on right now.
Yeah, agreed.
None of those Charter cases have gone, and we're losing them. They won't even listen to any of the evidence, right? But I don't think people are going to, participate in that to a large extent. I got to truly believe that that's the case now.
I mean, I know a lot of people who were very pro that now are like, oh man, that was some bullshit. Like there was a lot. I get it. I have a friend, actually, it's interesting you say that about pediatrics, because he brought his kids to their, doctor, and they're like, oh, you haven't given them their COVID shots yet. And he's like, no, we're and he's vaxxed. And he was like, no, we're not doing that. He's like, man, I experienced what they looked at me like. Yeah. And he's like, and I realized that's what people have looked at you like, and I'm sorry. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, that's, you have to find a deeper part of yourself. Yeah. As I was saying before, I felt like it wasn't fair, because it changed my trajectory of my work for a moment. It changed a lot of things. But now I have so much gratitude, because it deepened my resilience, my commitment to my own integrity. I've witnessed myself be willing to lose everything. Mm-hmm. I've lost a lot of things. Mm-hmm. I have friendships and really important relationships that have been deeply impacted. And, I have hope that there's resolution available there, But when I think about it, like I think about relationships, I think about communication, I think about repair.
Mhm.
There are so many people who don't have that opportunity to be reflective in the sense like that someone hasn't validated the deep trauma. Like the person in your family or the majority of your family who didn't invite somebody to Thanksgiving or Christmas because some chick on Twitter who considers herself a reporter says you shouldn't invite your uncle.
Yeah.
Even though we know the product does not prevent transmission, even if we're trying to be rational, it would be everyone gets a test. That's the only rational but
if they're symptomatic.
Yeah, and I was so heartbroken when I know so many friends who were not allowed, not invited, and actively disinvited. And my heart breaks for all of them because it's like the only reason that happened is because there was an intervention in the sacredness of our relationships. To me, it's the deepest violation to take away someone's family from them. It's honestly, it's heartbreaking, and it's maybe people don't get it yet, but the people who didn't invite those people to Christmas are violated in that experience.
And because a lot of the people who made these decisions are still making the decisions, there's an active effort to not shine a light on this. And because you can't have that conversation, there's a lot of people who would benefit, who are hurting because they're not having things validated. I mean, I see COVID injection related injuries all the time. Temporal relation. You took it a couple of days later, a couple of weeks later, totally healthy. All same symptoms you hear all the same time, the same people. Not same people, but same symptoms across the board. You know that, and even though I can't say I know exactly how to treat this, or I have something that's going to help. Although there are some things that you can certainly do, and there are people who have gotten better for sure. So you can provide that optimism that just acknowledging that they were hurt by this and that they did the right thing and they got hurt anyways for it, and they're not crazy. I have a patient who teenager hurt. The hospital told the patient that this was psychiatric and that she should, when she started having her symptoms, she should go dunk her head in a bowl of ice water, which isn't even a therapy for psychiatric illness. But the kids got objective evidence that she's been hurt by these things. So yeah, they're being told. Some of them are being told that they're crazy. So just being able to validate that this happened. I'm not sure how much better this can be, but we know there's hope that it can get better. Mm-hmm. I met a woman this week. She's suicidal. And this is not uncommon. They're at the point where there's nothing. I don't want to live this way anymore. The pain is too much, so on and so forth. Right?
No one's validating,
and nobody's talking about that because and so that's why you get frustrated because this is not just hurting kids. This is hurting people across the age, and that they would benefit enormously. We could just say, yeah, let's talk about this. Let's look at seeing what actually works to help you with these things in terms of therapy. This one's a tough one too, this anecdote, but to give you a state of where we're at in healthcare in Alberta right now. So my wife, she was dealing with a bunch of neurological illness that essentially we don't have complete cause for, but they've largely resolved. But as part of that evaluation, she was found to have a brain tumor. And it was a deep brain tumor affecting. And then she went to have it removed. And that was just like 6 weeks ago, in April. So I got to be at the Foothills Hospital in Calgary, for the first time on the neurology ward since I was a trainee, seeing where we're at with the quality of care people are getting there. She had an incredible surgeon who I know very well, and he did an awesome job. But my wife is a very outgoing person. And as I was going to load stuff up to the truck, because she was getting discharged, she's like, I'm going to come down with you and just hang out outside the hospital. And she talks to everybody, and she was on a lot of morphine, talking even more than normal. And she struck up with this conversation with this woman who was in her 60s, probably 60s, I think, early 50s, maybe in her late 50s. Anyways, she had a feeding tube and a pole bringing her food for her. And, Brendan's talking to her, and I go up to the car and I come back down, and, my wife and this woman are hugging, and they're both in tears. And it's like, so what's going on? So it turns out this woman who lives in rural Alberta took the shots like she was told. She had symptoms after the first one, but got told in order to keep her job had to take the second, so she did. Since that time, she can't swallow. She's not able to swallow anything. Doctors have acknowledged that it's related to the shot, but as a result, she needs a permanent feeding tube, and she had been in hospital because for months now, because the rural settings don't have the ability to do this apparently. So she's stuck at Foothills, and the reason they were crying was because she had just been offered medically assisted suicide by the medical team that morning, and my wife was like, "You do not, kill yourself. This is, your wife is worth living." She had been offered MAID 3 or 4 times by the medical establishment. So we've injured patients who we don't have solutions for. We, in a lot of instances, deny that the injury even occurred, and then we offer to kill them. It's I can't even wrap my head around.
It's like out of horror films.
It just makes you just want to cry, right? And this woman, from what I understand, still can't get back to a rural setting because rural settings don't have the ability to do this, I guess. But there are dozens and dozens and dozens of stories. You think that person is going to take an H5N1 shot? Of course not, right?
No.
So they I don't think they totally realize that because they're in complete denial of it. And so as someone who wanted nothing more than to be a scientist and a doctor, to see that this is the system, right? It's tough. It's but as I said, being able to validate, even if it's only some patients' injury, and provide at least some temporary hope on these things. You got to continue keep your medical license as long as possible, and granted, the college is still coming after me for misinformation and so forth, but they you just see on this individual basis how meaningful it is just to have the most basic thing. You're not crazy. We hurt you. I'm sorry that you got hurt.
Yeah. And we got you.
Yeah.
Like we got you, or whatever we can do. Here is this opportunity to leave the earth so we don't have to care for it, care for you.
Mm.